Hello, everyone. This is Metric, the UX podcast with Tim
and Michael.
And we're going to talk about what we left off last time. I just think of it like a person sitting next to a fire with a big book, and they're like, "Let's go to that bookmark where we were and just turn to that page."
If we ever get a substantial amount of subscribers and we can do it, we should convene periodically in person to do like a fireside chat.
I'm cool. It would be more like a dumpster fire chat.
Yes,
but thinking of UX, it would definitely be a dumpster fire chat. Spun off from last episode is how does a UXer get experience, right? If they don't have UX kind of experience. I think what you were just talking about is what do you want to do in your job, and kind of maybe what's the role that you want to fill. And that's where I said, I used to want to be called a UX developer, but I kind of want now to be a UX product manager.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking, as you know, I like this definitional game. I understand that it's nitpicking over how one defines user experience and how one defines service design. I get it. I still think it's fun and I think it's useful. I just like the vocabulary part. I've been struggling with, for myself, conceptualizing product design and product management versus service design and what is a corresponding PM role for the service design spin-off. And so this just gets into silly titles.
I hate the D word, which you just said 4 times. Design. I just hate the D word. Really.
Yeah, why?
Well, because I think where I'm at is kind of the northeast, which is kind of the greater Pittsburgh area, right? We're kind of close to DC, the Beltway, Columbus, Cleveland, Maryland. And
you guys had a great name for it, like the Rust Belt.
Yeah. And so basically, the perception of UX here is design based. Most of the job descriptions, when you look for a user experience person or a professional, they are, in fact, the description of a UI designer with some UX kind of sprinkled on top, right? It's like, oh, we'd like to have some user research too, but we don't expect to do that on the daily, or for that to be the meat and potatoes of the job. So I, for years, thought UX developer, I have a prototyping something, putting it in front of a user, getting testing and having that research. That's actually building a product and bringing it to market in my mind. Design, to me, just seems kind of like, what's the style guide we're going to wrap around it, or what's the coat of paint or font we're using,
I don't disagree. I think it's along the same lines where I think the phrase design thinking is getting a little tired.
Yep.
It's bordering on meaningless, I suppose. I don't disagree. Down here in South Florida, the landscape is the same. We have boot camps that are graduating UX/UI designers. That's how they're coached to build themselves on LinkedIn. I've been privileged to go to those portfolio nights and help coach them, but it's one of those things where, hey, it's really quite of a spectrum between the user experience research and then the user interface design and the aesthetic look and feel. Definitely leaning more toward the latter, right?
Yeah. So I guess what my thought is there is me kind of thinking I could write my own job description, right? And it's I can do some multimedia design and I can do some content strategy and information architecture. And I have 15 years of web design and kind of front end dev experience. And I find it much more now to where for years I would just when there's this kind of every seminar I went to and every kind of certification class I went to was just there's a UX designer and there's a UX researcher and never do the two meet. And I'm there's actually a UX developer here that you're not seeing at all, because I've worked in companies to where the UX designer is basically a UI designer and they don't understand code. And I'm how do you design and not know what CSS is or the effect of what you're designing? And Cap Watkins has this great quote, which is basically all designers should be able to write CSS. And if you disagree, you're wrong. And I can tell you why if you have an hour. But basically, and I agree with that too. Because, unless you're a graphic designer that's never going to touch code, I mean, I mean, you're in a print world, right?
Yeah.
And so, or making logo designs or something of that nature. What you're describing is like, okay, so, and how this I think ties in is like, okay, if you could write your job description, right, and you could do anything that you wanted to do, how do you determine what that is, right? I'm pretty sick at this point of doing web design. I'm pretty sick of CSS, and I have no desire to do design anymore. I mean, I can focus on pixel perfect nudging and colors and style tiles and like fonts and how are we going to make this all look and pretty. And I just don't care anymore. My focus is much more on the content strategy, meeting the requirements, and can the user use this interface, and how do we find that out? You know, as opposed to how pretty is it? I think you're very much like a unicorn, like I am, I would say. And it's just like, but there are definitely certain things in there that's, I guess, under the umbrella of the unicorn of skills that I just don't have any interest in doing anymore.
No, I'm with you. One of the reasons I jumped on the service design bandwagon, when, let's say, like in practice, on the surface, the differences between, service design and user experience design are semantic. But one of the things that I think the semantic difference is valuable for is conceptualizing scope. Like you, I recognize right now that my marketable skill, my more, how about this? My easier to market skill, I'm a developer. I personally, I increasingly lack or lose interest in what I would think we might call like the implementation layer of like a strategy. Mm-hmm. Like I am not so much interested anymore in doing or implementing the feature, whether that's, designing it or building it with the code or seeing it to fruition if it's not a code-based service. But I prefer to be, I guess, at that more abstracted level, higher. Like I like to, like you said, determine what is the right direction to go in. How can we prove that? How can we prove or demonstrate that what we are doing now works? How can we prove that it doesn't? And so that kind of like macroscopic analysis is what really appeals to me. And so again, definitionally, I find I gravitate more toward service designer because what I am, for lack of a better word, interested in designing is this larger holistic service, regardless of the channel it appears on, whether it's a web thing or not. I don't care.
Yeah, I definitely. There's a great article that I read here recently on UX Pen that is product manager and UX designer. What's the difference, right? And I increasingly I'm kind of like on my fourth software team as a UX person, right? Mm-hmm. One team was building a content management system and a learning management system. Another one was kind of a library with third-party apps and integrations and building our own custom apps, which were open source. And one was e-commerce. And then now it's different type of single-page progressive like web applications or things of that nature for various kind of healthcare or government or whatever. I guess what I've come to notice over the last working on these specific software teams as a UXer, I sometimes catch myself thinking, like, what is this BA doing? This business analyst is writing all of these ethics wrong, or they're looking at a business process or system, but they're not leaving out the human side, right? Or as a product manager, so a lot of times there's a product manager and a product owner, and like one is kind of focused specifically on interfacing more with the devs and like what's in the sprint and like what are we prioritizing feature-wise, where the other one's more interfacing with the stakeholder or client, right? I sometimes find myself like, I'm literally doing the product manager's job and my job. You know, I'm kind of ingesting the requirements, and then like, how would this live in a UI, and how can we test this, and then testing it to see with actual users, and like, oh wait, we need to completely change this because our perception of this and the epic that tied to it is different. And so like, I just see myself going away from what I used to consider myself as a UX developer with research more into a UX product manager or UX business analyst. And so that's kind of where I want to grow right now. And I know people are probably different. Like the people listening to this podcast are probably like, maybe I want to learn more dev and code, right? Or someone else wants to focus a little bit more on more design, where someone else is like, I wish we would do more research.
Right.
So I think like I'm trying to and I am in different ways, is how fill out that gap, which I don't have that knowledge, base, or experience with. And recognizing that it's not always going to be the same. How do you get the training or knowledge or skill set to get in the field that you kind of want, and it sounds like you're wanting to maybe not UX product management, or you get away from a UX developer, or what do you
yeah. So this is where we started getting into, like, I don't know if we can call it theory. I've been thinking a lot about what organizational structure for like systematic user experience practice I like best. Like, let's agree on the premise that, hey, good user experience is good business. A goal should be that, hey, we can embed these kind of a user-centric ethic throughout the company. Let's say that we get there where everybody generally agrees that, hey, we're user first. We really care about our feedback, not just because like we care about the people of care about our users as people, but we understand to some level their holistic experience translates to the other success metrics that we care about. Given a semi-idealistic world like that, opens up, I think, new organizational challenges with you no longer require specific user experience people or specific user experience teams to champion and to prove and to demonstrate the value between UX and whatnot, because that ethic is distributed among teams. What then is the next step?
Yes, and this is where the group talks about this a lot, and sometimes that hypothetically, once user experience is disseminated amongst all of the people that are on the various teams, is there a UXer anymore?
Because, right. So for instance, like, I think Nielsen Norman Group has a great video. I'm sure it's an article too. So this came to your question, is like, what kind of what kind of career am I trying to design for myself? I want to be concerned with the strategy, utility, design, usefulness of the service that connects all the products. I'm not 100% what that looks like.
What's it called? What do you think that's called? Like in a current business, I'm not even sure what it's called.
I'm glad you asked, because
a director? Is that a director?
A director of service design. That is the title that I'm pitching in this like little Dropbox paper. For other reasons, I don't think I'm going to get there. But that is sort of what has become my dream job, where my goal isn't to say, hey, does this product work and fulfill the need for what it, or for, its reason for being. My goal and my job would be to essentially identify the evolving landscape of the jobs to be done, and determine through user research and systems of design how well we are currently and how well we can in the future solve those problems. So that's my thinking.
Is this like a CXO, like a chief experience officer, or is it more like a UX director?
I called it a director of service design because, like, I have another, clearly, Tim, I think too much about this. But I have another supposition that I think at a certain level, it is no longer useful to the company to have like a certain scene, I don't know, like a certain super high management level of user experience. So unless the company is sufficiently big.
I did well, you said it right there. Actually, what I was going to say is, like, I completely disagree with you, but it's based on the size of the company.
Right.
So for a place that doesn't have or UX at the table, when you think about, it's kind of your marketing team, it's kind of your CX team or your customer survey team, people calling in and like complaining or intercepting through forms, but it's also web analytics and it's also UI design, but also like your traditional UX researchers, UX kind of designer team. There's I've worked at companies to where they didn't have giant companies that didn't have someone at that high level, and it sucked. But I've also worked at companies to where there was someone at that high level who was chartered with like a CXO, kind of a chief experience officer, and everything was segmented and the process was followed. So like basically, like a UI team was different than the UX team. The UX team was basically a research team. and they
Gotcha.
would do some mock-ups, but they would always be low fidelity, no styled mock-ups. Now, you do get into some places where like there's obviously your UXer who likes design and they're like maybe stepping on design's toes, or there's a UXer who likes dev and they like try to build their prototypes in code and that steps on those toes. So it kind of sucks for those people who, when you have all of everything segmented out and compartmentalized, well, what about the people who want to do multiple skills or work on
Right.
So that's a problem. But if you think of it as arranged around products, though, and having a CX person, and that your product team has like at least some design, some dev, some research, some business knowledge, content strategy, like on the team, it doesn't matter who does it, but that those bases are covered, and you have representation at the CEO level, that's fantastic. But it's for size, like you said. Like it's
a matter of
when
scale.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. There are companies of scale that serve or they fulfill multiple services. Like their jobs to be done. I mean, so you could see a whole bunch of like these like directors of service positions. You have a bunch of services under which there are even more products. And I think when you have one or more of those service layers, it makes a lot more sense to, again, consolidate some sort of like VP or CXO role above that.
Yeah, smaller than that, being matrix is totally works. You know what I mean? So if I think of like Adobe, I'm just assuming this. I do not know this knowledge anyway whatsoever. But if I think of like Adobe Creative Cloud, I'm assuming that each product, Photoshop, Illustrator, Audition, Premiere, has a PM and a PO, and they probably have a lead dev, and they probably have an architecture person, and they probably have a business analyst and everything. Yeah. And then above all of the Creative Cloud's product managers, there's a director of product management probably, you know, and there's a director of development and a director of architecture and engineering. So, I mean, I think it's just, like you say, it kind of depends on your structure, like how many products do you have and all the products related, and how many services do you have and are the services related, and how many layers there are. I guess like in my heart of hearts, I imagine myself as just like a UX Care Bear.
Yeah.
Like I just want to do good and put good in the world. I just want to help people that helps the world, right? Of course, like finding UX nonprofit jobs is like completely impossible. Almost. Sure. There's like very few, and literally. I think I work in tandem a lot in my current job with product management. So we partner very closely. We do a lot of the same jobs that kind of overlaps each other. And then there's definite differences when it comes to like wireframes or making final kind of cut decisions based on business interests and deadlines and things. I would never be able to actually get product manager experience at my current job. And so one of the things I briefly mentioned at the end of last time is like, hey, if you want UX experience or you want design experience or developer experience, one of the best ways to do that is teach yourself by volunteering. And you can literally just look, there's a GuideStar, which I think is the nonprofit search engine. You can look at nonprofits around you who would totally need help, right? They would need help with design or user experience research or marketing research or more product management or development. And so I've been kind of talking about how do you get that? Like I've been kind of itching that scratch by doing that. And that's actually, to me, it's been very fulfilling because it's kind of like, I can't do that in my 9 to 5, but I can kind of build my skill set, you know, kind of on my side doing volunteering.
Do you ever feel like you run out of bandwidth though? Because it's kind of like 2 jobs or like a job and a half.
I am like a very high functioning person. And I mean that in just like, I have 20 balls in the air all the time and I enjoy that, right?
Yeah.
But that works for me. And I think my schedule would drive most people crazy, I think.
There was this old, I can't even remember the name. There was back in not the early days, years ago when I was like hunting around podcasts for UX podcasts or whatever, there was a 12 episode long podcast that I stumbled across where I think it was an undergraduate in user experience or human computer interaction or something, and he was interviewing, I think we hate to call rock stars, but they're the rock stars, right, of UX, and he was interviewing Luke Wroblewski, who fascinates me, and
the UXer for Google,
well, and before that it was like Polar, like which I love that little app, and I think he was at Yahoo as well. The student was interviewing Luke Wroblewski, and he's like, how do you get so good at, you know, all this stuff? How do you think about all of this stuff? Where do you get this experience? And he's like, you have to do it for your job, and then you have to do it for fun after your job. And then when you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep, it was like, that's what you read for fun, right? And it was just this ethic that, like, to get great, you have to sort of like live and breathe it, and you have to hustle beyond the 9 to 5.
I would agree. I would agree.
I think
100%.
so.
I don't think you have to sleep upside down or drink blood or do anything like crazy like that. But I mean, I think it's one of these
UX things. Unicorn, UX vampire, more like.
Exactly. I'm just jazzed about the field enough to where, you know, that I can juggle those kind of different balls, and they all just happen to be really related to my career. You know?
I totally think that's it. Like, if you love the work, your job becomes your hobby. You know, that can be dangerous in terms of work-life balance. That, like,
it's not sustainable forever. Like, I'm almost 42, and I'm just like, I can't do this as much as I did in my 30s. You know what I mean?
I think the ultimate question is like, yo, if you don't have the bandwidth, let's say you have the full family and you have all these other whatevers, how then do you pivot into a different role?
With very limited bandwidth, I mean, I would say is that's where you kind of need to know. Yeah. You need to be strategic. So you need to be strategic about your time and be honest with yourself and focus where you have to, right? And so if you're getting together with a group of people, and you're just like, how much time do I literally have a week? Don't bullshit yourself. You maybe figure out like I have 3 hours a week I can spare. That is it. Well, then what is the thing that you want to focus on the most? Is getting a certification important for you? Is that like doing online free courses, or doing like MIT has a UX certification 6 weeks course, or or doing like a Nielsen Norman Group 5-day course or something like that? Or is it like you want to start blogging about what it is your experience is, because maybe your goal is to get your writing out there, to do more speaking. If your goal is to do more development, then I would say there's tons of different places that would want free developers. And if you don't want to be at free developers, if you need money, then, you know, Upwork. There's like tons of places where you can go that just get paid to do kind of the work. Yeah. So there's like almost no, my answer to you, I guess in regards to any person who would ask that, is like, be honest with yourself and be strategic about your time, and make sure that pays off in some way that's going to benefit your portfolio, your resume, or, you know, or something of that nature.
There's an aspect to this that, like, you know, it implies a certain amount of privilege of choice. You're like being choosy about your employer as much as you can, and consistently looking for like the right job. Like they let me like draft my own job description, and I got to put user experience and make user experience part of that, when before I didn't. I was a developer. I was able to kind of like get into a position where I get to have the kind of like hardcore strategic experience and vision making experience that I need, while also doing this like developer role that my resume largely markets me as, so that my next career, like my next step, wherever it is, I now have something to stand on and I can pivot. So being able to like choose, like if you're able to like find those companies and be choosy when you're on the job hunt, to find a place that allows for that sort of flexibility and encourages that kind of experimentation, that goes a long way, because, you know, you get to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You don't have to do the side hustle to kind of build out this experience.
I think that's actually like, I know we always get into this, but it's like, I think that's actually like a whole conversation into itself. Like,
yeah.
Like when you, like the interviewing process of like, what are the red flags of like, oh shit, this is definitely not going to be, I don't want to be a UXer at this place because of X, Y, and Z, right?
We have to talk about this next week. This is a great topic.
Yeah, and then the other thing is also not just knowing what you want to do or what the red flags are, not. And then if I could impart kind of knowledge to people of like, these are the red flags of the giant dumpster fire job that you do not want to get into because it is that bad. And you don't know starting out, right? Starting out, you're just like, I just want any experience. But then like you just open the can of worms. The worms are like, there's a lot of places that have horrible UX practices that have like, you're the one UXer in a team, or it's like, it's not really UX, you're just doing UI, or they want a UX UI developer all in one. And it's just, there's no way. And so, yeah, that's a talk unto itself. Like, I don't know if that's just like red flags or if that's just like the questions to ask in an interview to kind of get the knowledge you want. I don't know.
No, I think yeah, in shopping for that that user experience job is tricky when user experience is defined differently by every single job description that's out there as well, and like you don't know what to look for, and you can't anticipate if you're coming out of one of these like boot camp like certification programs first without having prior experience. You don't know that UX at job A is wildly different from UX at job B, and how do you know what kind of job you want? And again, I think that there's also like that skill set about having the wherewithal. It seems obvious, but having that wherewithal to remember that as you are interviewing and they're making value judgments about you, you are interviewing them for the right fit. Granted, this is all privilege, right? Like if you need the job or whatever, you tend to do what you got to do. Yeah, like in my last job position, I took a little bit of a pay cut to enter a much more
different field. That's
ideal. Yeah. Like it was the cost of the pivot, but also it's returned manyfold. I'm in a much better headspace. I'm professionally fulfilled, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that is like a lot of people, I don't believe the whole American dream bullshit, which is like you can, just find out what it is you love to do and just do that and find a way to make money on it. It's just like, it's like the whole hope floats thing. It's like you've just killed your dream like by doing that. I think what's important to think about is like you kill your dream because let's say I like, this is a quick metaphor, but let's say like I like carving wood. It's the one thing I love to do. I do it all day long. It makes me happy. It brings me joy. Well, you can sell that and start doing it, and then it becomes a job, and then it becomes something that it's a task that you have to do, and you don't enjoy it anymore. And then the thing that you loved, you turned into the thing you hate. Yeah. So if you've not seen the movie Hope Floats, that's literally the whole. I just gave you the Hope Floats right there.
Featuring Sandra Bullock and Harry Connick Jr.
Yes, exactly. He's basically anyway.
I've seen that movie so many times. I'm not sure why. Like it's one of those things that I'm well acquainted with these Sandra Bullock movies,
Well, so the thing that's the point of that movie, that Sandra Bullock experiences, and that a lot of new kind of thirsty UXers who are trying to get jobs or try to get like that experience, there is this thing where they have to be like, well, what can you stand to do? No job is perfect, so what can you stand to do? And can you at least stand to do this while you build your skills, or is it knowing that's a stepping stone to go somewhere else, And I don't think that's a lot of, like, you can interview and have, like, all these red flags and you'll never find a perfect job. But can you stand to do this to get into e-commerce? Can you stand to do this to get to be a senior? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. No,
you imply this vision that I think people need to embrace early in their career. I wish I had this notion that seems obvious, but you don't really think about it when you're hunting for jobs, is like when you're hunting for a job, does this help you get to the job after that? Like this notion that we're long-term career bound to like a single like employer is no longer true, especially in our industry. And so, like does this job fulfill your professional needs and your goals and your lively needs for the next 2 years? Does it help you take the next step? Not the step up the ladder, but does it help you take a step closer to what you want to be doing? There's so we should.
Let's talk about that next time.
Let's talk about this next time. Yeah. You can follow us on Twitter at metricpodcast.com. Tim is at UXBear. I am at Schofield, if you can suss out how that's spelled. Your support goes a long way in helping us grow and reach new people. So if you get a second, please take an opportunity to leave a kind review. If your podcatcher of choice has stars, star us, and more importantly, like point us toward a colleague, someone you work with, or maybe a friend who gets off on this kind of stuff. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. We'll be back at you next Monday.
Oh my God, that's so bad.
And I'm just gonna end cut.